Hey, welcome back to the program. It is Friday, August 16th. Thanks for joining me. Please subscribe, like the channel, click the bell, tell your friends and family, yada, yada. A little casual today. Hope you don't mind. It's a Friday. Heading out to the gym shortly. I just wanted to get this up before this afternoon when President Biden and Kamala Harris are set to announce their great accomplishments on the economy and their win over inflation, as indicated by the July CPI data at 2.9%. And there's going to be some announcement this afternoon about capping prices in the food sector in an effort to help households and consumers. So ahead of Kamala's first policy initiative to be announced this afternoon, price ceilings to fight ongoing inflation. If inflation is better, why the policy? Why now? Kamala Harris has been the vice president for 3.5 years. Why now these tools are being used? Inflation was at 8.9% in 2022. It's at 3% today. Why now? If inflation is better, why this policy? I want to offer another primer on inflation. It's widely confused in the media, and it's being confused by Kamala Harris and Joe Biden as well. Biden and Harris want to take credit for the July CPI coming in at 2.9%, the consumer price index. And they say prices are falling. It's not true. Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Jared Bernstein, tried to address the July CPI numbers in the White House press room on Wednesday. As always, it was not an impressive display. He doesn't seem to be very sharp on economics. And he didn't know the data well from the CPI release. He could have looked at the data before it went in front of the media. The only thing he could say was some prices are falling, which is fact true. Used car prices were down 10% in July. But as Karine Jean-Pierre repeatedly cites as our only indication that the Biden-Harris team has done something on inflation is the effort to use government power to get prescription drug prices for seniors to stop going higher. Not so much fall, but to stop going higher. Remember now, inflation is the rate of change in the consumer price index, or the producer price index, or any price index for that matter. When the inflation rate is positive, that means the price level is rising. When the inflation rate falls from 8.9% to 3%, as it has since July of 2022, it does not mean that the price level is falling. It means the price level is rising more slowly. The first derivative is still positive. It's the second derivative that is falling, is negative. So prices are rising at a decreasing rate. And the opposite can be true as well. Anyway, this is called disinflation. If the price level was falling, the inflation rate would be negative. This would be deflation. Deflation is what most people want. Deflation is what Harris wants. Deflation in some sectors generally can be good, but deflation as a policy can be very damaging for the future. Ask Japan, and China's about to feel that same thing. Harris seems to think we have deflation. We don't. Now, within the large data set of prices that makes up the CPI, the typical basket of goods and services consumed by the average household, there are always some prices that are falling, deflation. And of course, other prices are rising. And now when we have July CPI at 2.9%, that means the vast majority of prices within the basket are rising. Biden and Harris continue to misrepresent the truth of the matter when it comes to inflation and their role in spiking inflation rates and then the multi-year drop in inflation rates. The accomplishments that they cite, President Biden is the most accomplished president in history, are the cause of our inflation problems. Not the only cause, mind you. Right? We could quickly list some other causes of inflation. The unprecedented and historical mistake of locking down the economy in response to COVID. That's Donald Trump, by the way, and blue state governors. That resulted in 2 supply and demand shocks in less than a year. So that's a cause for inflation. The Biden-Harris immediate turn against the fossil fuel industry via executive orders in early 2021 and the coincident support for EVs spiked inflation. And importantly, and primarily, the massive fiscal stimulus by the Biden-Harris team added fuel to the fire. And that massive fiscal stimulus are the accomplishments, the 4 legislative bills that President Biden signed into law that represent the greatest accomplishments of a president in American history. And it's just ridiculous. When we think about public policy, we have to think about cost-benefit analysis. That analysis has been kind of pushed to the side by Democrats for years, and some Republicans, mind you. only focusing on benefits. And when we think about these accomplishments of President Biden, you're only focused on the benefits if you can only determine that these are the great accomplishments, because the costs have been severe, both in terms of inflation, real wages, and of course, our national debt deficits and interest on that debt. So we had 4 legislative acts. First, we had the American Rescue Plan Act, $1.9 trillion, passed in March of 2021. Passed House 219 to 212, passed the Senate 50 to 49. This included direct payments to households under $75,000, horrible policy. $350 billion to states, $14 billion for vax distribution, which was a waste of money. $130 billion to schools to reopen, $300 billion for extended unemployment benefits, $50 billion to small businesses, $25 billion to restaurants, and the expanded eligibility under the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, for Medicaid. Now, what's interesting about this is we're giving more money to small businesses, more money to restaurants. But remember, we had that COVID relief program where if you had a certain number of employees, you could apply for grants from the government. Of course, that was a fraudulent scheme. And we had many businesses and companies that didn't require the money to take the money. Anyway, the second bill was the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, November of 2021, $1.2 trillion. Passed House 221 to 201, passed the Senate 69 to 30. It's a little bit bipartisan support there. I think there were, what's that, 18, 19 Senate Republicans supported them, mostly the rhinos in the Republican Party in the Senate. Then we had the Inflation Reduction Act, which was not an Inflation Reduction Act, which is a Green New Deal. That label is a lie. It's now referred to as IRA, right? The Democrats don't want to use the words Inflation Reduction Act. They use IRA now. Passed in August 16th of 2022. $900 billion comes from the House Green Build Back Better Act. Anyway, this bill passed the House 220 to 213, passed the Senate 51 to 50. That's Kamala Harris's vote right there. Kamala Harris got this bill passed, and this is a direct cause of inflation she's going to be talking about today. And then the CHIPS and Science Act of August 2022, $280 billion to help the semiconductor industry, passed the House 215 to 207, and the Senate 64 to 33. Now, I mentioned the vote count because I want to indicate that the Democrats had the White House, they had the House, and they had the Senate. They don't get a lot of credit for passing legislation with their majority, especially legislation that had no consideration for costs, and huge amounts of deficit spending. So anyway, let me finish with a comment on the Harris proposal to be announced this afternoon about price caps, price ceilings, efforts by the legal side of governments at the federal and state level to incentivize companies to drop prices or stop price gouging. Clearly an election year gimmick. They'll propose legal methods to compel companies that produce and sell food to cap their prices, shrink their profit margins. Using both the power of the federal and state governments, they will go after gouging. Tough to prove. After all, producer prices, the PPI, input prices have tracked consumer prices closely since January of 2021. Anyway, setting price caps directly or indirectly via lawfare will end badly, as all price caps and price ceilings do. Think of communism, think of socialism. The result will be shortages, inefficiency, and ultimately higher prices. Want to wait in line for butter? I don't. I don't want to wait in line for milk. At any given time, markets can be determined to be in equilibrium. That is to say, supply equals demand at a given price, an equilibrium price, and an equilibrium quantity demanded. Nonetheless, we can determine equilibrium supply and demand. To force companies to lower their prices via lawfare and perverse political incentives would result in an effective price ceiling. And a price ceiling is set below the market equilibrium price and quantity demanded in supply. This will result in demand exceeding supply and result in shortages. Consumers and households will compete each other to buy a given product and drive prices back up, and black markets will develop. This is bad public policy, clearly politically driven. And this is the first public policy enunciation of an actual policy by Harris since she got she was crowned the Democrat nominee for the presidency here in 2024. And this is not good. Say no to price controls. The fiscal side, Biden, Harris, and blue state governors are the continued drivers of inflation in the US. Too much deficit spending, financed in large part with money printing from the Fed. We call that monetization of debt. Harris gets no credit for the fall in inflation rate since mid-2022, but she gets a good portion of the blame for the spike in inflation since January of 2021. The Fed hiking interest rates from 0.8% to 5.5%, and decisions by households and businesses and their change in behavior are the reason why rates of inflation have fallen. There is no victory yet. We still have an inflation problem. Interested to listen to this announcement today, so pay attention for that. All right, that's all I have for you right now. Always try to buy American.